Good morning and good afternoon to our guests from Europe and Africa. Welcome to today's online event discussing the findings of our new report, AI and Biotech, its implications for cybersecurity. On behalf of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, I'm very pleased to announce that we are joined now by the study's principal author, Eleonore Pauwels, and who is a senior fellow with the Global Center on Cooperative Security. Eleonore has produced very insightful research for CAS on several occasions in the past, and we thank you for your continued and very valuable contributions. Today, Eleonore will guide us through the report's findings, and we'll discuss implications with a panel of renowned experts and practitioners. Thank you so much for being with us. As AI and biotechnology integrate in cyberspace, the stakes for national security and global stability are mounting rapidly. The present report analyzes these challenges from both a transatlantic and a global perspective. The United States and Germany are recognizing these converging security threats and increasingly view the bioeconomy as an extension of their critical infrastructure, essential not only for public health and technological advancement, but also for national sovereignty and security. Meanwhile, emerging bioeconomies in Africa are facing significant security challenges and require meaningful investment to benefit from the biotech and AI convergence on their own terms. I look forward to this timely exchange and would like to encourage participants to participate vigorously via the Q&A function in the app. Dear Eleonore, thank you very much, and please get us started.
Thank you so much, Dirk, for your support, for your great remarks. So before we open for discussion and for remarks, I have the pleasure of introducing our outstanding panelists, whose expertise sits at the very forefront of AI, biotech, cybersecurity nexus. So their diverse perspectives, from innovation leadership to public health, genomics, and cutting-edge data security, will anchor our discussion today and help us think more sharply about the risks and the opportunities ahead. Sultan Mekji is co-founder and CEO of the secured AI firm Frontier Foundry, and among other achievements, he served as Chief Innovation Officer at the FDIC, was a scholar at Carnegie, and a professor at Duke University. He's a globally recognized expert in AI, biotechnology, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and Web3. Dr. Sofonias Tessema is a public health genomic epidemiologist with extensive expertise in molecular diagnostics, genome sequencing, and bioinformatics. At Africa CDC, Dr. Tessema leads the Africa Pathogen Genomics Initiative, Africa PGI, that is catalyzing genomics, AI, and bioinformatics capacity building for Africa. Dr. Sterling Sawaya is founder and CEO of Gene InfoSec, a startup focused on protecting genetic information with patented molecular cryptographic methods. With expertise in bioinformatics, statistics, and biochemistry, Dr. Sawaya was a fellow at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and also serves on the consulting advisory board at Merrick & Company. So you see, I'm in excellent company today, and I'm really delighted to have the pleasure to share insights with all of you. So good morning. As I said, I'm delighted to be here with you. Let me also warmly thank the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, Dr. Ostri, Dirk and Jan for their great leadership in supporting this research project. So my goal is to leave enough space to have a great discussion with our panelists. So I will use slides, but just to help me go faster with my remarks. So I was going to start by saying that we have entered a complex, dangerous, yet promising decade. And there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Last week was such a time for AI and biotech, with a new report of the National Security Commission on emerging biotechnology. And while the report conveys commending scenarios and recommendations for the US to lead tech convergence in an aggressive, systemic competition with China, one set of strategic concerns may have been sidelined. the way that cyber warfare could increasingly undermine, even hack, the US potential to lead as an AI biotech superpower. And as we digitize biology, cyber warfare can target life-saving innovations from drug discovery, clinical trials, disease surveillance, the production of better food and materials, to the gigabytes of genomics data we've collected in a century. And let me be blunt, no country is currently equipped with the cybersecurity architecture needed to protect the modern bioeconomy from the cyber threats emerging in this complex era. But even more sobering, the convergence of AI and biotech introduces new profound vulnerabilities that go beyond traditional cybersecurity concerns. It creates new challenges for global stability and proliferation, for economic and biosecurity. Why? Because increasingly, offensive cyber operations can be used to facilitate the illicit transfer of dual-use knowledge in AI and genomics. And so the threat is twofold. First, cyber attacks can extract sensitive biotech data and knowledge to be exploited for harm. And such a harm includes manipulating the integrity of operations critical to the bioeconomy, such as undermining the efficiency of therapeutics and medical countermeasures, or targeting subpopulations and ecosystems with more precise bioweapons. Second, adversarial attacks on AI itself can repurpose those powerful systems to produce novel, malicious biotech applications. Biosecurity experts have demonstrated how generative AI could be repurposed to identify potential pandemic pathogens and explain how these pathogens can be designed in a lab. In another red teaming, engineers in the pharma industry showed that AI models for drug discovery could be manipulated to produce de novo potential toxic molecules that could become the basis for bioweapons. In this context, traditional security and non-proliferation doctrines struggle to keep pace. Biosecurity protocols, which once focused on physical containment and border controls, now need to address the cyber dimensions of threat proliferation. Now let me jump in and explore how an AI automated approach to modern biotechnology is taking shape. AI is not just accelerating biosciences, it's redefining who can do it. Algorithms can now design molecules, simulate bioprocesses, and predict gene expression. AI assistants, LLMs integrated into cloud labs, are guiding lab work, even producing novel protein structures. Automation and robotics will soon unlock fully autonomous labs that operate with limited human intervention. Next, the integration in the lab of AI agents that can learn from our behavior and intent, interact with each other, and develop new forms of mentorship will severely amplify dual-use potential with consequences difficult to anticipate, mitigate, and control. In essence, the very tools that democratize biotechnology are also weakening our ability to secure it. And several key trends actually play out. First, DNA is the new hackable substrate of biology. Genomics data is uniquely sensitive, often tied to ethnicity and identity, but also inherently dual use. Think of how immune system data, pathogens data, and reverse genetic protocols could be weaponized. Managing this dual use aspect is even more crucial when you realize that both human and AI systems still struggle to fully understand biological complexity. And this is why preserving genomics data integrity is so critical to explainability. Second, biotech infrastructure, cloud labs, vaccine production lines, biofoundries, these systems are increasingly modular, automated, and distributed. And this creates a massive cyber attack surface. Third, AI systems themselves are vulnerable. Adversarial prompts can jailbreak safeguards, AI polymorphic malware can evade detection, generative AI can automate deception, allowing states and their proxies to target biotech systems increasingly at scale. This convergence has made our bioeconomy a new target of cyber, hybrid, and economic warfare, where IP theft, transfer of wealth, and coercion could become part of statecraft, and most countries are behind. And indeed, cyber offense has become a powerful business, a pervasive threat, and global in scope. Now, the advent of AI agents with their capacity to manipulate behavior, evolve malware, democratize and automate attacks, will likely supercharge both the cyber arm and the cybercrime industries. We also witness collaborations between nation states and a proliferation of cyber proxies that have increasingly targeted the bioeconomy, including during the pandemic. And so we have to prepare for a new class of AI cyber threats, including data manipulation. Adversaries can poison datasets in genomic research, corrupting pipelines and clinical trials for precision medicine. Adversarial attack on cloud labs. AI-assisted labs can be hijacked, compromising experiments, distorting results, or even producing harmful bioagents. Biomanufacturing disruption. Ransomware can shut down vaccine and insulin production. Companies like Pfizer, Merck, Miltenyi Biotech, Americold, and others have been impacted. Such attacks could focus on manipulating the integrity, safety, and efficiency of critical medicines. We could include cell and immune therapies. And similar attacks could extend to another bioindustry, what we call genomics-based agriculture. Compromising disease surveillance, cyber threats could also exploit pathogen surveillance systems, disrupting our early warning capacity across human, animal, and ecosystem health. Targeted discrimination, genomics data leaks, such as breach of DNA testing companies, can be weaponized to target ethnic groups, eroding public trust, privacy, and safety. Corrupting biosecurity screening, AI models can be used to detect biosecurity threats in DNA synthesis, and they could themselves be manipulated, obscuring sequences of concern rather than flagging them. Finally, there are also converging cyber and biosecurity implications. First, AI-led cyber attacks could impact dual-use research of concern, with pervasive implications for biosafety and biosecurity. For instance, targeting the operating systems of a high-security lab, a BSL-4 lab. But in another very feasible scenario, threat actors could also exploit generative AI to craft information warfare about biothreats. They would use LLMs to more efficiently exploit knowledge about biothreats and medical countermeasures to destabilize civilian populations and undermine public confidence in health systems and governance institutions. And therefore, I think the ultimate security challenge we face in the 21st century is our capacity to anticipate and mitigate the implications of increasing transfer of dual-use knowledge between proliferating threat actors. And there is an urgent need to prepare for a diversification of risk scenarios that could harness tech convergence. So let me give a very quick look at the report's case studies, and then I will close with final thoughts. How is the US facing these challenges? The US drives innovation in AI, genomics, and cloud infrastructure, but that leadership is fragile. Strategic competitors like China are siphoning and acquiring genomics data, investing in US biotech, and exploiting asymmetries in data access. During the pandemic, China exported mobile gene sequencing to capture global health data, feeding its AI systems, gaining advantage in precision medicine. The US cyber response is slow and fragmented, while it could run faster with better cyber guardrails. DHS and CISA now recognize the bioeconomy as critical infrastructure. Important actors like NIST, BioISAC, DARPA, Sandia Labs, and a few private actors are developing cybersecurity for genomics data, but cyber defense often remains too siloed. Non-proliferation and dual-use oversight are outdated, and AI innovation is accelerating faster than our ability to secure it. And so unless cybersecurity is hardwired into biotech platforms, from lab and even DNA design to cloud interactions, the US could lose its edge while becoming more vulnerable. Now, Germany faces an existential challenge. It must drastically accelerate in AI biotech convergence for economic leadership and strategic autonomy, yet the country has to deal with complex regulation, cybersecurity directives, GDPR, the EU AI Act, national biosecurity laws that could slow tech integration and complicate risk management. Germany is also reaching a turning point. The need to think in geopolitical terms about technologies once seen as purely civilian. Yet Germany has such a siloed approach to sectors spanning health, pharma, biotech, and food processing that it weakens its cyber resilience. And in the very near future, the country needs to protect its bioeconomy as a connected critical infrastructure, better integrate cyber and biosecurity, adapt data security to tech convergence, and promote interoperability with trusted allies. Now, emerging bioeconomies in Africa, they are in a unique position to create what we could see as global genomic goods that could benefit their own populations, but also the rest of humanity. But the continent's datasets are critical for training global AI models in health, agriculture, and pathogen surveillance. But the risk is clear. Without strong cybersecurity and without strong benefit-sharing agreements, African nations can become data providers with other states and private sector actors reaping the economic value. In the past, China and the US have been racing to form partnerships, but partnerships must be built on what I would call a fair tech convergence transfer, not just data predation. Emerging bioeconomies in Africa need investments in local genomics data infrastructure, AI R&D platforms and skills, and modular biomanufacturing. You have to remember that 90% of medicines and 99% of vaccines are imported. They also need cybersecurity architectures built for sovereignty, not dependency or predation. And with the Africa CDC's Pathogen Genomics Initiative and Germany's ongoing biosecurity capacity building, there is a beginning of a foundation, involving, as you see on this slide, the Federal Foreign Office, GIZ, other academic partners. And such capacity building, along with key actors in non-proliferation, could provide emerging bioeconomies with the technical expertise and infrastructure needed to manage biosecurity threats, mitigate proliferation, and also the opportunity to consider a crucial step when building innovation, what engineers call security by design approaches. So where does that leave us when it comes to final thoughts on governance? Stepping back, I think that one of the most pressing questions is how to reconcile the imperative for robust cyber biosecurity and non-proliferation measures with the global innovation agenda. And we need a paradigm shift in how we think about protecting our bioeconomies. So this is no longer just about safeguarding hospital networks or patient data. It's about securing the entire life cycle of biosciences innovation, from DNA to the AI systems shaping biological futures. Second, it's about creating trust architectures that enable secure collaboration across borders and sectors. It's about ensuring that emerging bioeconomies are not just protected, but empowered to lead and benefit from AI and biotech on their own terms. So with their own research agenda, their own protections, and their scientific sovereignty. Most of all, it's also about designing systems where security is not an afterthought, but a foundation. So secure by design, powered by equity, and governed by foresight. And indeed, I firmly think that there is a need to rely on foresight methodologies that involve different expertise, disciplines, and generations. Why? First, to better prepare for a diversity of dual-use risk scenarios that could harness the convergence of information warfare, cyber warfare, and biowarfare, and cause extensive civilian harm, but also to devise non-proliferation measures and security by design mechanisms, what we call sometimes phase gate processes, that require innovators to foresee and mitigate potential for misuse. So run faster with better cyber guardrails. So let me close here. Thank you for attention and have the pleasure to listen and interact with colleagues on the panel. So who wants to react first? Sultan, do you want me to give you the floor? You knew
Well,
I was going to
first off, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and nice to meet those of you I haven't met previously. I found two things quite interesting about this paper, the output and the discussion that I would raise. The first is a very nuanced view, and one of the things that I think here in the United States we struggle with from a regulatory perspective is the inability to decouple the specific technologies from the regulations. So it very much becomes a matter of how we do something versus what we want the result to be. And again, the regulatory environment in the United States is non-prescriptive in a way that you certainly don't see in Germany or across the rest of the EU. The second thing is something that I didn't hear that I would just raise as a comment, which is to highlight that so much of the actual, especially next generation genomic infrastructure, the actual machines that turn biology into digital, are in environments where there are serious concerns about IP theft and data security writ large. So, a significant percentage of the next generation sequencers in the market are inside of the People's Republic of China. And, there are serious questions about where that data is being stored, how it's being stored, if it's being stored safely and securely, et cetera. And then the third thing I would just say, and this is something that I have been beating the drum on for 8 years now, I just feel like I always need to say it, is that quantum computing is coming faster than many people realize, and quantum resilient encryption is lagging, slower than it needs to be. The National Institute of Science and Standards and Technologies here in the US, only in the last few years, even has references for quantum resilient encryption that can be used. The data that comes out of most biotechnology systems and that goes into the current generation of generative AI, which is where I spend most of my time, is some of the most important data 50 to 100 years from now that we must ensure is stored safely and done in a way that we can go backwards in time and understand when a compromise occurs, what the risk factors there are. And you highlighted a few of those potential cyber risks. But the fact is almost every single American who's had a genetic test, their genetic data is freely available inside of the People's Republic of China. And that is something that we can't allow to continue to happen.
Thank you so much, Sultan. I'm going to go to Sterling, and then I'm going to have what you just shared. Not only give me a fright, but I'm going to also react on some of what you said, and maybe elaborate with you, or ask you to elaborate on these scenarios. Sterling, what is your reaction to maybe some of the the taxonomy of the threats I mentioned, or do you see things going in the same direction? Then the reflection from Sultan on quantum, generative AI, how is that being discussed in your business, in your perspective?
Well, first off, your report was just almost incredibly comprehensive, and the amount of territory that's needed to be covered in this interdisciplinary space is quite large, and you do a wonderful job of touching on all the important points. But I'd like to build off of something that Sultan said, and Sultan brought up issues around data ending up in the hands of China, and that our laboratory infrastructure is lacking security. And I would highlight that we're facing challenges in the laboratory infrastructure because of the devices that we use, and the new sequencers that arrive, the ones that even are not made in China, are built by startups, and they aren't built with strong security. So even if we have quantum-proof encryption coming out of the lab, the laboratory infrastructure is actually infiltrated by some very sophisticated hackers. So for that, I would highlight some work that we do with the BioISAC. It's an Information Sharing and Analysis Center. This is a nonprofit and is a wonderful hub for all things related to cybersecurity in the biospace. And so there are a couple of reports there, one of which touches on data integrity, which is of incredible importance that we trust the data, especially if we feed this into expensive trainings of our AI systems. And the other is a concept that is important for us as we look to the laboratory and try to determine which type of security is appropriate for the different laboratories. I would say that some perspective on this is that my team has trained dozens of laboratories on 5 different continents to improve the cybersecurity of their laboratory systems. And what they need to do depends on not only where they started, but what type of data they handle. So we have a range of recommendations, and a good place to start is to question, what type of data do I handle today, and who's coming after that, and how might that change in the future? So these, starting from these perspectives of, it's a very difficult environment with very challenging opponents, we have to then ask, where do we need to go now, and then where might we need to go in the future? And beyond that, of course, I have lots of technological discussion that we can go into of how we can solve some of these problems. But I just wanted to expand a little bit on your report and what Sultan mentioned there to begin the discussion here today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for emphasizing again the notion of data integrity. I mean, it's true that as we think about it, if it's increasingly also serving, being synthetic data or being data collected, but serving as training data for AI models, that even expand the type of concerns we can think about. Dr. Tessema, I'm gonna go to you and ask you a little bit, how do you frame those different tensions in your work and in your perspective? Because I also, interviewed a few experts who were telling me, we also don't want to go with a paradigm of securitization that's too strong and thinking, not exclusively, but primarily about security, and not, empowering the bioeconomy with potential for collaboration, for data trust, for flows of knowledge. And that's where this question of, how do we deal with not only data integrity and the protection of data sets, but also how do we think about what can become dual-use knowledge, how data sets about population could be either used for benefits, and that's certainly something we need to invest in, but also could be, if not weaponized, misused in different contexts. How do you approach all those different tensions?
Yeah, thank you so much again for the invitation, and I echo what the previous speaker said. This is an extremely comprehensive report touching all the key issues, especially going through the African components, very impressively capturing all the progresses, the challenges, and the issues that we always talk about here. I think overall in this space, in the AI biotech space, Africa is lagging, very clearly lagging in all of these areas. But that lagging comes with opportunities and challenges. I think the opportunity that we see, and as you've also indicated in the report, is we can leapfrog. We can start from the best technology. That's what is happening, for example, in genomics. We're not going through all different old technologies. We are getting the 2024 latest version of the technology in a starting lab that has never done any type of sequencing. So you are bringing an amazing capability to the hands of these laboratories, to these countries. But the other ecosystem around it may not be ready. I think what you said around cybersecurity, data management and data processing capacities, national level regulatory systems, all of this is really not in place. But the technology, we can bring the technology, but we cannot bring all of that, and we cannot copy it from somewhere and bring it here unless it is developed nationally. So that is, I think, a big challenge. But to address that, one issue that comes to my mind always is, how do we build the knowledge, the AI knowledge, the genomic knowledge, the cybersecurity knowledge? This has to be built overall, because we're new. You have maybe the youngest person in the institutions knows how to operate these machines, but these people may not be the ones who are making policy decisions. So I think, how do we reach to those high-level leaderships, policy makers, to understand the opportunity and also the risk, and put in place a system that is enabling, at the same time also protecting not only the country, but also globally. So in this space, we are blessed with so many different types of diversity of pathogens, diversity of human genomes and all that, which I think is a critical input for the global competition. around AI and genomics, or genomics powered by AI, which is coming. But as we do that, we are also a big risk. The risk is now, you are bringing this technology into areas that never been there before. Maybe the ecosystem is not properly in place to make the proper protection. And the point that you are raising in the report about genomic data manipulation, that can happen easily, and this can go wrong in many ways. So I think, yes, technologically, whether the technology is coming from China or the US or Europe, we are leapfrogging from a technology perspective, but all the other things have to be homegrown, have to be developed in the country. I think that is where probably we are facing the biggest challenge and delays. Of course, there is quite a lot of competition in this space. I think what we are advising and working with the countries is to really help countries to develop national strategies around genomics, coming up with a national strategy based on how that actually help and enable the countries. Maybe I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Based on what you just said, I think there are interesting, threads that have been kind of emphasized by all of you. So there is one problem that you emphasize very well, Dr. Tessema, which is the one of knowledge and skills, and so the capacity also to do foresight, right? So basically to understand what should be a secure by design approach, how does it look like, what are the scenarios we are trying to prepare for, what are also the the areas where there are benefits and there are innovations that we cannot miss, and that's where we need to prioritize a secure by design approach, or at least invest in our knowledge and skill right away. So there is this foresight, knowledge and skill kind of issue. Then I think you mentioned, and Sultan mentioned that too, this issue of the regulatory and policy landscape, and basically how there is also a form of either inertia, policy inertia, or also a lack of adequacy, not just in time and speed, but a lot of adequacy maybe between what is seen by engineers, by scientists, and also from the next generation, the way we kind of prototype and think about how to work with those converging technologies, that facing or confronting policy frameworks and policy views that are just maybe not where the again the knowledge and the insights are not built for adequacy with the tech perspective. I think there was also I was gonna ask you maybe if the three of you, if you could elaborate on this notion of security by design from your diverse perspective. So maybe in emerging bioeconomies in Africa, what would that mean? Where do we start? Since the innovation ecosystems are kind of burgeoning, where do we start, and what are the priorities we need to focus on? Sterling, you mentioned your work, on 5 continents, and you obviously have very in-depth tech expertise of how to do this, especially on the data integrity, data security side. How would you advocate, or would you advocate for that approach? But how do you also see it play out, and materialize? And then Sultan, I'm very interested in, you bring this mindset, that really looks at not only just AI and biotech and the usual conversation maybe we have between people in that space, but you also bring this issue of quantum computing, how we could increasingly have mentorship and interactions with tech that are online, virtual, where dual use knowledge is so difficult to control, right? And you mentioned, the regulatory complex, and some of the tech issues also. So from your perspective, where do we start with when it comes to thinking about security by design? I don't know who wants to.
Well, I was just going to say, you've phrased one of the hardest questions in the Venn diagram of 3 of the most complicated technology landscapes and regulatory landscapes globally, between biotech, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence, and then add quantum, and you've made it
Yeah.
4 for 4, right? The fact is for most of these technologies, there are no comprehensive regulatory frameworks, right? It is very siloed. It is very piecemeal. You see glimmers of both horizontal and vertical regulatory, scientific and commercial integration in places like Singapore and places like the UAE. Attempts in the United States and the EU have, generally speaking, not been super successful. The ISACs, which I'm very glad Sterling mentioned, are amazing resources, but have no regulatory implementation capabilities. And certainly here in the United States, we're in a bit of a regulatory upheaval. I'm not sure if anyone noticed, we got a new president a few months ago, and that's certainly changed some of the regulatory dialogues here in the United States. As a former regulator, I can speak to that. But the reality is, and I think Dr. Tessema, and forgive me if I pronounce that incorrectly, made, I think, what it was is two of the most important points that we should think about. The first is that we don't have to build on what previously has existed. We can start from a clean sheet of paper based on the technologies and based on the outcomes that we're wanting to. And I think in legacy environments like in Germany, in the EU, the United States, we're a little trapped by how we have done things before. And I think there's an opportunity to take a clean sheet of paper there. I'll give you a great example. Costa Rica had to rebuild their entire telecommunications infrastructure after a natural disaster, probably about 20 years ago now. And instead of rebuilding with cables and poles in the ground and things like that, they used wireless. And so, they're one of the first countries to have mobile broadband available to basically the entire country. And it was delivered, deployed, and operational in a matter of just the first version of it was up just a few weeks after the natural disaster. There's a lesson there where the regulatory community, the commercial community, the academic community, the financial community, et cetera, all work together to ensure that they could get that outcome they wanted. For security by design, that's the same kind of thinking that I think we should think about globally. So let's just say that I have a gene sequencer that I want to use through an outsourced provider that happens to be in China, in People's Republic of China. And let's just say it's the only one I can get access to because of availability and cost and a variety of other features. Security by design could include something like a zero knowledge environment where the device is spitting out data in such a way that even if you were the guy sitting in the room running the device, the data would come off of it in an encrypted manner that they couldn't touch. Sterling rightly made the point that most of these devices aren't being built that way. But that's not something that any one nation state can declare through a regulatory process, right? That is a global requirement that requires a degree of collaboration that simply doesn't exist.
Thank you so much. It's interesting you are saying it has to be global, and it cannot necessarily just come from a few engineers or from a few startups, thinking.
Yeah. I mean, here's a perfect example. Let's say that you're a contract research organization in Africa, and you have two options. You have one that comes from a quote unquote highly regulated environment where the data comes off in an encrypted manner. It will be more expensive. It will be slower, no question, at least initially. Or you have a lower cost, higher delivery pace opportunity that comes from the People's Republic of China. You will very likely pick the People's Republic of China simply because our civilization runs on capitalism, right? And nobody has all the money they want to pay for every bell and whistle they want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for clarifying with an example. Sterling, I'm going to ask you to probably react, to those thoughts, because I think that plays really well with your remarks. But I'm going to also introduce a question from the audience that I think you answered to some extent, Sultan. But so Jay is asking, which role can states play to regulate this field? Can rules stop researchers to explore those risky corners, and especially when there are implications for the competition with China? And I think that's kind of part of what we are already saying. But so if you want to expand a little bit on that issues of how do we govern dual use knowledge proliferation in a context of high level competition, and at the same time because we can still believe, in a global innovation agenda. How do we reconcile with that imperative also? Sterling, I don't know if you want to take some of what you think is best, but also some of the interesting tech and security by design issues.
Certainly. So, I would start with a great focus and a call to attention on your in your report is this potential for dual use data. And we don't necessarily know exactly what dual use data is. And as Sultan pointed out, this is valuable data over the next 50 years. So while I may have a strong belief that human genomic data has very dangerous potential dual use that could threaten nations or ethnicities or individuals, not everybody may agree, not every state may agree. Furthermore, pathogens have dual use potential that a new biodesign tool in the future could utilize. So we're in a world where we're not sure exactly what is dual use data and what is not. And then, as Sultan brought up around regulation, I would point out that right now what we see around the world in regulation is genetic data has two categories. It's either send it out to everybody, I'm sort of oversimplifying here, but send it out to everybody, put it on the internet, make it free, or lock it down, don't let anybody have access to the room in which the files are stored on the computer, right? Because if you run into some very, very dangerous pathogen in the wild, then you lock that thing down because you really don't want the sequence of that getting out, because if the sequence gets out, not only can that be used to design new weapons, but that could be used to replicate that organism. And so you no longer have control over that organism. You don't know if the outbreak occurs, if it was somebody brought it in or re-synthesized it and brought it in, or if that leaked from your own laboratory. Now, depending on the organism, it can be easier or harder to synthesize, and there are rules around synthesis, but very dynamic changing environment. And that gets me to the point of regulation to say that as a lab or a company doesn't necessarily know what they're holding, how dangerous it is, and what the regulatory environment will look like today and in the future. And so to get to potential solutions to this, we have to now stop thinking in terms of all of the genetic data either belongs in the bunker or belongs on the internet. And there has to be some in-between approaches that we take. And so we have a recent publication out that suggests a particular method that allows the genetic data to be blended between similar organisms. And by blending organisms together, it prevents adversaries from being able to very simply reconstruct the entire organism through synthetic biology. And so this approach, very strong approach, doesn't require a lot of sequences. And we're already blending organisms together to do sequencing, right? We don't just sequence one sample, we sequence 100 samples at a time. So for full disclosure, my company is developing technology to apply cryptographic methods to DNA molecules. Sultan brought up ways in which the DNA sequencer can put off secure encrypted data. Our approach is before the sequencer, so that helps resolve that issue. And by this new data format, we now have something that's in between. We now have something that where parts of the genome can be shared, parts of the genome can be locked down. And so this is how we like to suggest we approach this problem, because if we just approach it with the bunker method or the public data method, we're going to see a lot of countries completely locking down all of their data. And when it comes to a new emerging disease or sharing something like flu genomics, something that we need for countermeasures, it's important that we find the middle ground so that we can share the data that's necessary and keep data that has dual use potential at least under control, if not fully locked down.
Mm-hmm. And not only that bunker approach is not what we want, because it would be would be hindering innovation and benefits for all, but to some extent, is it even something with other tech convergence? Is it even something possible? But I think the article you mentioned is methods for safely sharing dual-use genetic data. That's really interesting if people want to read it. How would that materialize in a new a clean slate environment where the AI biotech innovation ecosystems are being built. And I'm gonna give the floor to Dr. Tessema first to see how maybe he answers that. But if you want to then, chime in and explain how, since you work also on with different countries, see how that would look like. Because I think there is really something interesting with those methods you are proposing, and what are the barriers to innovation in that case? But how does it materialize? Is it even something that we could share, or we could start working on as we are building those new ecosystems in emerging bioeconomies? Dr. Tessema, I don't know how you see not only that issue but some of the other tensions we have talked about, also the some of the policy inertia.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Sterling was proposing. We have that two extremes, either openly sharing or not sharing at all. We have countries that do not put any type of health data on any type of online system. It's not allowed. So that is at the extreme of not sharing anything anywhere versus the one that is open sharing. So what we advocate for, and I think is really important, is, as you said, Sterling, is to really do a proper risk analysis. What are we sharing? Why are we sharing? Where are we sharing it? I think that's really important to have a proper risk analysis, because every sequence does not carry the same weight, depending on the risk that's associated with it, or depending on its value for innovation and product development, and even the market for that product per se. For example, a human genome might have a bigger human market versus an Ebola genome, which is only a risk in certain parts of the continent. The third point that I want to raise is the issue around platforms. Where do we share this data? Do we have a proper globally agreed upon data sharing platforms? In my knowledge, I don't think there is any. Or if you go and look at closer to all those platforms, these platforms are not created based on consensus on the data governance, consensus on the benefit sharing, consensus on the risks, the biosecurity risk, as well as the cybersecurity risk. We put data on those platforms without knowing how secure these platforms are. And we don't know where it ends up. So I think really thinking globally around a proper data sharing platform, well-designed, well-secured, and something that can actually enable innovation, at the same time prevents the risk and limits or reduces the risk that is associated with data sharing. I think there's global responsibility of sharing, and also there's global responsibility of not sharing. So I think balancing between the two extremes and always finding that middle ground is really critical. So I think from what you said and what I was trying to describe by itself comes into your security by design. Are we secure by design of these data sharing platforms? Are we secure by the design of the sequencing machines? Are they secure enough to generate data? All other platforms that we use, are they secure by design? I think that secure by design, if we ask that question at every step, we'll definitely identify the gaps, and those gaps needs to be addressed collectively. I think this is for the global benefit, not only just to benefit a single country. Everyone is running around these sequences is because there is some sort of global market for it. That global market is the opportunity. So I think we all need to collectively, globally think about these loopholes, gaps, challenges, and risks together and come up with a solution.
I think you mentioned something really, you started with the concept of proper risk analysis. And as we're all developing insight here, I was kind of thinking, what are the epistemic methods? What are the methods we need to implement between different expertise like yours, the one of Sterling, the one of Sultan? How do we make that happen? What kind of methods do we use to be able to anticipate dual use risk scenarios, better define what dual use is, by whom, and by what type of either data or organism or the what we're talking about, but also, as you said, to be able to work with those different levels of the technology itself, the data sets, the market we are reaching, so the intent for the collaboration and for the transfer of knowledge and data that's happening. I don't know if that's the right question to ask, but Sultan, to some extent, I think when you said we would need to, and Dr. Tessema said it too, but we need to have this done globally, collectively. So there is a question of incentives and a question of incentives in a global market competition. Is there a way to make those methods of both foresight and risk analysis something that that we choose to implement, and where do we start with whom, or it is really something that we don't know where. I mean, I don't know if you can help me see what's kind of how do we make that happen? I mean, do we have to wait for?
We don't have to wait for anything. We have history where we've done this before in slightly different areas. And I'll just use the internet as one great example where public-private partnerships work together between academia, government, and the commercial sectors globally to create standards that then were embedded in organizations like the W3C and IETF, et cetera. And it allowed us to all use the same version of HTTP, and it allowed us to standardize on RSA as the encryption technology we use. Now, that was 30 years ago. And really, it's one of very few examples in the post-digital age of this being done effectively. But we don't have to start from scratch. I mean, there were a variety of places where during that universe where the National Science Foundation and its global counterparts coordinated global technology construction and a regulatory system around that. And it was not perfect by a long shot. And there were a lot of wrinkles on it, and a bunch of things that should have been done, like a standard encryption backbone for the entire internet, was never actually put in place, even though it was part of active discussions. I know I was there. And we are in a moment now where if we look at that, the internet at the time was simply focused on how to enable global e-commerce. That's really what the commercial incentive was for the commercial providers. For the governments and academics, it was a way of getting technology out of the lab and into environments where there was a balancing act between regulation and innovation. And different countries approached it in different ways, different political jurisdictions, different nation states. And the interesting thing is it allowed the sovereignty of every one nation state to be maintained because there were domestic controls that could be put in place. Your internet access in the United States looks different than your internet access in Singapore, as two very different examples, right? Or Denmark or Norway or Germany. And so to me, I think that there is a percentage of this that we can do, but the biggest challenge, the biggest difference. So I've just given you a positive example. The wrinkle that we have right now is globally, the governments and academics are giving, roughly speaking, 1/3 of the resources they were given in the 1990s to do work like this. That's a well-established number in terms of decrease of funding from the U.S. federal government into areas like this through NSF and DOE and others. And so the resources aren't there, the people aren't there. It was not set up as a self-perpetuating system. Every year, on average, the United States spends between 3% and 5% less on research nationally in the government and academic sectors. Once you remove administration and all the other stuff, and you see all the budgetary issues, et cetera. And so in terms of incentivization, the incentivization back then was the governments were saying, we will incentivize you by giving you money and giving you open regulatory environments that allowed for a balance of innovation and regulatory controls. The governments today do not have the same incentive tools in the toolbox to do the same thing. And certainly not at a scale where you can get to even a plurality of nations, let alone a majority, let alone a 80% consensus. And so I would say right now, the incentives issue is not a commercial issue because there's absolutely commercial incentives to go down this path, right? because there are domestic, regulatory variabilities that will slam someone's thumb down if they do something too wrong in enough places. But when you get past that, I think it's really a matter of, especially in Europe and the United States over the next, couple of years, how to navigate an absolute decrease in resources and governmental support to create the incentivization programs. So you're asking, I would say, question number 2, but there's a question number 1, which is, where do the resources come from that would create an incentive system? And right now, there is no avenue for that.
And if we don't, if we don't manage to build that, to build those incentives and even answer the first question before that, I mean, where could that leave us? Some of, because I had that taxonomy of threats, but basically we keep having a very fragmented innovation ecosystem where we slow down research on all of those benefits we are looking for.
Well, and combined with the commoditization of so many of these technologies, I mean, just look at generative AI. It took OpenAI a decade ago $1 billion to build its first large language model. I can do nearly the same thing on a $7,000 Mac laptop for free. That's how quickly the generative AI commoditization has occurred, right? And there are thousands of companies all over the world doing that. And the vast majority of those are unsecured systems, by the way, that are being built and thrown around, right? So because the cost has come to basically zero for so many of these technologies, we're now at a moment where it is forgive the aphorism, the wild, wild west. With a laptop, I can do what used to take a supercomputer 2 years ago. And so if I happen to get access to the genome sequence of Ebola, which I actually think is worth far more than the genome sequence of a human right now, by the way, I could do something really terrible with that if I chose to, right? And with things that I could order on a variety of different e-commerce sites, notably a variety of them from the People's Republic of China, I could do something really terrible if I chose to. And it does not take more than a person, a laptop, and an internet connection to do a lot of that now. And so the environment has changed radically from just a few years ago. And so the risk in not doing anything is now very high. I say often that in the cyber landscape, we're at the highest threat landscape we've ever been, right? And once you include a forward-looking view on biotech, that makes it 10 times worse.
Thank you so much. We still have a few minutes, but I was going to go back to Sterling and ask you, in that increasingly interesting scenario or near-term scenario that Sultan just developed about proliferation. What's your reaction to that? The question of incentives, methods we could develop, the time frame also we can act when we see that the speed of proliferation is going so fast. And then we'll go to Dr. Tessema to ask you this question of proliferation. How is that approach in your end? But at the same time, as there is democratization, is there a way also to turn this question upside down and see it maybe not just try to pull the threads that would help us see it in a positive light? I mean, again, that goes back a little bit to this question of securing by design or thinking about how we use democratization, but maybe think about it with more of a security mindset. And I don't know how does that materialize, but if we need to confront ourselves with the future, maybe that's something we need to think about. Sterling, do you wanna share a few insights?
Yeah, Sultan brings up a great point again about the cybersecurity landscape that we're facing is incredibly difficult. But what we want to look at also is what we can actually make traction on. And the point that Sultan made about the AI systems being able to be trained today on our laptop, AI is out of control, out of the box. The government can come in and say, "Oh, I want to regulate AI in this country," and China can come and just open source AI that's almost as powerful as the one that we attempted to regulate in this country. So AI is out of the box. Then when we talk about biotechnology, we don't know exactly where that's going, but we do know that there's enough companies in enough countries across the world that provide technical equipment and synthetic DNA that synthetic biology is out of the box, right? So, as much as we want to have in the United States the strictest regulation around what can be synthesized or not, it is not a complete solution to that problem. And so that turns us to the cybersecurity solution. And when it comes to things that we know how to do today, even though they're difficult, we know how to protect data. We know how to secure systems. And then there can also be technologies like the molecular cryptography that we are building that can be added to these systems to add that quantum proof layer of encryption to the information. And so today is the time that we need to start acting on cybersecurity, and we need to start looking at data security and data integrity. Things like the 23andMe bankruptcy is likely to cause major issues around confidentiality around a lot of Americans' human data. And that's a big privacy concern, if not a big security concern. Beyond that, we have things like the foot and mouth disease that showed up in Europe. And Hungary, I believe, is saying it thinks it's a bioterror attack. The fact is, when it comes to biology, it's very difficult to know if it was natural or not. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to attribute something, even if you know it was not natural, right? How do you know for sure where it came from? So with all of these factors coming very quickly, what I see is that there will be a need for national security reasons to be larger investments in cyber biosecurity, biodefense, and the best thing that we can do today is protect our data and be aware of how we share it, and also build those partnerships, whether they're bilateral or multinational. Build those partnerships, as Dr. Tessema mentioned, that we need of how do we share that data? How do we know where it's going? How do we know it's going to a secure place? These are all the things that we can do today to start mitigating these issues.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Tessema, if you want to answer, it's true that you had mentioned, the issues of platforms. I was kind of wondering which platforms are you talking about, but there are many, and there are indeed different levels of protection.
So if you look at, for example, genomic data sharing platforms, the existing ones like the NCBI, or the one that we used very popularly for COVID, the G8, these are existing platforms. But I believe none of these are actually global. The data governance, the data security, I don't think it's well regulated beyond the organizations that control those platforms. I don't think they are very transparent in the whole process of data governance and access to the data and where it's going and for what purpose it's being used and all of that. So I think there are questions around those kind of data sharing platforms. We need to have some common place where we all agree and be confident on its security and safety and use and all of that with a proper governance structure. That's what I was trying to say. But when it comes to, I think, proliferation or democratization, I just want to make one comment. I don't think we really can stop that. It's something that is unstoppable. As Sterling was saying, Sultan was saying, now you have access to AI on your laptop. And next door, you have the most powerful sequencer machine, which is the size of a flash drive. So if you combine the two, you can end up in something that totally is not is new and something that can have a bigger consequence. I think the biggest gap that I see is there is no urgency and there is no investment in this space. I think we are ignoring it for long. The technology is moving very fast, but the investment around the security architecture is not there, at least in the African context. The investment on knowledge generation, the investment on creating secure systems, it does not exist. I think we are ignoring it, and we are preparing ourselves for, I think, for the unexpected. For me, that's how I see it, because these two technologies combined can end up in a good way with a good intent for good things, but at the same time, this can end up in something that we all not expect, and we all not want to see. So I think in between, we need to have a good system that actually catch this before the worst case can happen. I think maybe I would really want to echo what Sterling was saying. The investment should be there. It should be a concern for countries, regions, and globally. And we need to invest in this space and create something that is fit for purpose and fit for the regions, depending on where they are in this technology architecture. Over.
I'm just, we're reaching the end of the panel, but I wanted to ask you if you could summarize in one or two sentences what you would want to see as the next step, either being a high-level next step or being something that actually, maybe we could do, or maybe not, necessarily as a research project, but if we could take on this conversation somewhere and maybe start having that interdisciplinary foresight or those methods of knowledge generation, we're thinking about, or a way to raise the awareness that needs to be, that needs to be there for incentives, for investments. In a dream, in a dream scenario, what would you want to see next to help you in your mission and to help us go further and better? Maybe Dr. Tessema, do you wanna give your? I start with you this time and give your last message, and then I'm gonna go to Sterling and Sultan.
Yeah, I think my last message is the report actually really is a good point to see where all these things converge, and how do we all advocate for security in this space. It should be considered as urgent and a global security concern, in my opinion. It has to be declared as a global security concern, and countries should act on creating the security platforms and ensure that we all are safe and we all use these technologies for the good of humanity and for the good of advancing those who are been disadvantaged for a very long time. Over.
Thank you so much. And that relates to some of this idea of benefiting on their own terms for emerging bioeconomies and being able to actually draft their needed scientific agenda. Sterling, I don't know if you want to. What would be if we could do something concrete, concretely, what would be the dream scenario?
I think that just the immediate next steps that we need to take is to look towards data categorization or data classification of genetic data, because countries like Germany can take the lead. Places like Germany recognize the need for privacy around human genetic data, but without international work where we can all agree which types of data needs to have higher security and needs to be more cautiously shared, then it's just not enough for Germany to, for example, move on their own in this area, because I am half German. And so as somebody who's half German, Germany could protect all of their genetic data, and the United States would have a large reservoir of genetic data that, corresponds in many ways. And so without a global network of groups, we don't all have to agree, but we all have to say, hey, these are the categories, this is how we treat these different categories, and then when we do agree, we can then share methods, approaches to either sharing the data publicly on secure networks where we can where the data integrity is maintained, or we can work towards private data sharing and also the sharing of highly secure methods for generating and storing the most sensitive of the data. So that's where I see us going next steps. And then beyond that, we need to build the technologies to store, share, sequence, all of these great things that need to be done with cybersecurity baked in.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning again the cybersecurity angle. It's a tough one. It's kind of the type of security that we almost I don't know. It's one of the problems that we don't tackle well, because not only it's complex, there is strategic ambiguity. There are incentives sometimes not to really build that into the ecosystem right away, and at the same time, it's a more pervasive entry point that what we think if we think silos between cyber, bio, and AI. Sultan, I think we're kind of facing this global security problem, but also this issue of global commons, right? I mean, because we also want a global innovation agenda. Ideally, there is an issue of collective action here that it's always difficult to to spur and to activate. What are the next steps for you? Where do you see us going, if possible?
It's a tough question to answer. Let me
Especially
say
now,
in 90 seconds. Yeah. I would say the four things that I wish we were doing that I don't think we're doing that I would love to see us do is number one, create the global communities that include commercial, academic, and government such that they can create unified vision and strategy. Right. So that's number one. Number two is create the right incentivization structures and resources around that. Third is to then use that to not just build new, more secure technologies, but also retrofit legacy technologies. You know, we have tens of thousands of gene sequencers around the world, just as an example, right? And then the fourth is to ensure that the right domain experts are in the rooms for these conversations. The number of times I've been the only person who wasn't a lawyer in a policy or regulatory conversation in London or Brussels or Washington, D.C. is, you know, it's not two hands worth of fingers. It's far more. And so, you know, we are at a point where there is good technology on this shelf. There's good research being done, like the work that Sterling has discussed as an example. But we are not thinking about this as a human civilizational problem. Everybody's in their own little corner, and the vast majority of the work is being done by commercial organizations that, frankly, are just going to run as fast as they can. And that's where we are today. And we see it with artificial intelligence. We're starting to see it in quantum computing, and we certainly have seen it over the last 15 years in biotechnology. And we're at a point where I think it's safe to say that the biotechnology cat is out of the bag. The AI cat is mostly out of the bag, and quantum, I'm worrying, is getting closer to being out of the bag. Now that's more hardware than software, so it's a little more difficult. But we're at a point where a number of these technologies are just running, and the regulatory community and the policy community, which isn't exactly the best at getting in front of technical issues to begin with, at least in my country, I think are now falling farther behind more rapidly because we just aren't putting the energy into creating the policy structures, especially the ones where there's partnerships, whether it's multilateral or bilateral or anything, or even inside their own countries. So sorry to end on such a negative note.
Thank you so much, Sultan. I mean, so much for tech convergence, right? And I like your way of framing a global human civilization problem. I mean, that means we're all concerned, and the window is closing fast, as you were saying. Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this discussion. It's really because of your insights and the way you have helped me, drive this discussion. It's one of the most interesting conversation I've had in some time, and I'm so happy you could make the time to share all those thoughts with us. Dirk, I don't know, I know you said I had to close the panel, but thank you so much again for the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, the US office, to be such a great sponsor and to help us only start to discuss those issues. I hope maybe we can figure out how to go next, and if we can help with this building this conversation and even more. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Tessema. Thank you, Sultan. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you so much for all your insights and your great knowledge. I will share your article and all of your work. Thank you so much.